Ladies and gentlemen, please take a seat. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed guests and honorable speakers, welcome to Paris, welcome to UNESCO, to the International Congress on Brain Sciences, Early Childhood Care and Education. Before we begin, I would like to kindly ask you to put your mobile phones on silent mode, please. Right? I think we can manage a day without technology and digital phones. Also, should you need translations, you have headsets on the table, so translations today are available in English, Spanish, and French channels 1, 2, and 3, respectively, with our wonderful interpreters who are here today. Thank you. Right, so I think it's time to begin. I must say it's wonderful. It's really wonderful to see so many dedicated individuals here today, united in this collective effort, collective commitment to transforming early childhood education. And I must add that this is really a key milestone in the partnership between UNESCO and the Babylou Family Foundation. Thank you to all of you for being here today. Well, as you know, the Congress is inspired by the Tashkent Declaration and the commitments to action from the UNESCO World Conference on Early Childhood Care and Education in November 2022, aiming to ensure all children have access to quality early development and pre-primary education by 2030. So, before we begin, a quick word. My name is Asha Sampath. I'm a journalist and documentary producer working mainly on themes related to sustainable development, human rights, and of course, education, with a special focus on the global south, I must say, mostly Africa. It's a great honor for me and really to be here and to be your guide. So the question you must be asking, I think you know it because you received the program, so what will happen today? Well, we will be honored, actually, and very pleased to be engaging with leading researchers, policymakers, and practitioners. The idea is really to bridge the gap between scientific research and educational practices, enhancing the well-being and holistic development of young children globally. We will explore the essential dynamics between theory and practice in the field of early childhood education. While we know that extensive research has been conducted and innovative ideas have emerged, I think it is crucial to understand how these translate into concrete actions on the ground. So we will be very honored because on our agenda today we have really esteemed speakers, and it includes a keynote address by Dr. James Heckman, and today we will have 3 very dynamic roundtable discussions on the intersections between neuroscience and early childhood education. But before we begin, we have a special guest online who is an illustrator and scriber. So his mission today is really to be making creative drawings throughout the day. So I think Asta is with us. Yes, you can see. Maybe let's share some warm welcome to Asta. Because I must tell you that the mood in the room will influence what you're going to see there. So thank you for that. So thank you, Asta. And now I think we are ready to begin. I hope you are. It's my pleasure now to invite our first speaker. So she's someone who has been really dedicating her life and work to education. She's an inspiration for me personally, and also, I'm sure, for many women all around the world. So please join me in welcoming on stage the Assistant Director General for Education at UNESCO, Stefania Giannini.
Good morning, everybody. We have to influence positively the guy who's drawing us. So please, first point, great to see this room so full of motivated people. I think the combination of UNESCO Convening Power and Babilu Family Foundation Convening Power is something very impressive. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you. Well, just a few words from my side. First of all, welcome all of you at UNESCO. Welcome to the Deputy Minister of Preschool and School Education of the Republic of Uzbekistan, a country which is very much on top of preschool and childhood, early childhood care and education. We'll come later on this. Welcome to, of course, our partner, main partner in this important conference on brain sciences and early childhood education care, Babilu Family Foundation. We have here Christophe Fond, the CEO. We have the founder, Xavier. So welcome all of you. And of course, last but not least, our keynote speaker, Dr. Heckman, James Heckman, the second time, yeah, at UNESCO. We are very happy to have you back, and we really commend your incredible work on this subject and on the link between education investment and development, economic and individual development. Well, let me say that for sure, as our dear MC graciously already mentioned, we'll hear from leading experts on how young children learn and how we can create environments that can really help them to flourish and to unlock their potential. That's what education is about, but that's very much important if we start early. The first 1,000 days are very much important for the rest of life. And brain sciences, as we all know, has shown that providing the right support and stimulation in the very early years is essential for children's growth and resilience. By age 5, a child's brain has already completed 90% of its development. I'm a linguist by training, and my background, my profession in life was linguistics. And in language acquisition, we see clearly that whatever it happens in this first, let's say, 3 years of life is absolutely crucial to develop the cognitive mechanism to learn second language, not only one, very many if possible, but also to open mind of children and later on in life, adults. And this is why early investment is crucial. Professor Heckman, Nobel laureate, as we all know, who is with us today, has demonstrated that every dollar invested in early childhood yields an average annual return of 13% in better health, education, and economic outcomes. And this is an important point to highlight every time we talk and we advocate for investment in early childhood education and care. But beyond economic return, let me say, investing in early childhood education is very much unlocking the human potential. As we all know that these formative years shape the future of children, and accordingly, they shape the future of society. And more than ever, we need a society based on social cohesion, on better understanding of each other, and not ultimately on peace. Yet, in this picture, we see still very many inequalities remaining. Let me mention some figures that our recent report brought up very clearly. While 89%, so almost total number, the whole number of children in high-income countries access pre-primary education, only 43% in low-income countries have the same opportunity. And this is absolutely an unacceptable divide. If you look at the sub-Saharan region, over half of children are entirely excluded from early learning. Well, given this tremendous need, in front of this backdrop, the international community has committed to achieving universal access to quality early childhood care development. And this is what the Tashkent Declaration was about 3 years ago now, when all ministers of education, almost all of them really, gathered in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, to agree about some critical points that I wish to remind you, because it's still not simply a declaration, but it's very much a roadmap to follow up. First point is about the budget. They pledge to allocate 10% of education budgets to early childhood. Second point is about, let's say, working and investing in the most important transformative part of education, which is teachers. Teachers in early childhood are not necessarily well trained, well prepared in all countries of the world. And we do believe that without well-prepared, motivated teachers, this part of education learning pathway will not happen as it should be. And the third component is about leadership, is about partnership, is about government's commitment that they have to take the ownership of this part of the agenda, and they have to continue to believe that we have to start very early and we have to invest in this important segment. So this is in a nutshell the Tashkent Declaration, the roadmap that we all designed together 3 years ago, and which is still, let's say, our pathway to go away until 2030. But most importantly, why we are here this morning, we are here in these days, and thanks once again for being with us at UNESCO. We are here because we know that without the support of science, without the support of brain science, cognitive science, whatever we are doing in terms of good pedagogies, in terms of good policies in education, will not have the same impact and the same results. So this, let's say, unconventional marriage between brain sciences and education is something that we want absolutely to establish as an appointment at UNESCO, and we are very committed to continue this way in the years to come. I thank you very much, and I wish for a great conference.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Stefania. Thank you for your inspiring words and invaluable insights. You know, your dedication to advancing education, we know that is truly admirable. Ladies and gentlemen, I will switch to French for this one. Et maintenant, mesdames et messieurs, et chers invités, j'ai l'honneur d'inviter sur scène le président de Babylou Family et de la Babylou Family Foundation. Je vous le disais en titre que la Fondation est fière d'être partenaire de cet événement, soutenant cette mission commune avec l'UNESCO en matière d'éducation précoce. Merci d'accueillir chaleureusement Christophe Font.
Bonjour à tous et merci de m'accueillir aussi chaleureusement. Merci Madame Giannini pour les mots et l'introduction sur ce sujet extrêmement important. J'aimerais commencer par une phrase en anglais un petit peu sérieuse, mais qui me semble extrêmement importante. C'est une phrase que j'ai trouvée dans le cœur de l'UNESCO, qui dit « Since war began in the minds of men and women, it is in the minds of men and women that the defense of peace must be constructed. » C'est un petit peu sérieux, mais c'est tellement vrai, et on doit y croire beaucoup. La moralité, le développement des peuples, le développement de nous-mêmes passe par l'éducation. Alors je vais vous raconter une histoire très personnelle. J'ai rejoint cet environnement d'éducation récemment, et j'ai dû expliquer à mes membres de ma propre famille, à mes amis, le pourquoi je rejoignais la petite enfance. Et j'ai senti dans leurs mots, dans leurs questionnements, un certain nombre de doutes sur le pourquoi. On me disait, pourquoi tu vas là-bas? Pourquoi tu vas faire ce métier-là? Certains me disaient rien, les amis un peu plus lointains probablement, mais me regardaient avec des yeux très ronds en disant « mais qu'est-ce que ce type va faire dans cet environnement de la petite enfance ?» Et cette critique honnête, ce questionnement honnête, c'est véritablement la réalité de ce que nous vivons au quotidien. Il s'agit de toute l'ambiguïté de nos sociétés. On confie nos enfants à des professeurs, à des teachers, à des éducateurs, à des professionnels de la petite enfance. Confier nos enfants, c'est quand même un acte majeur. Il n'y a pas grand-chose dans le monde qui soit plus important que nos propres enfants. Et en même temps, on ne leur donne pas le bon niveau de reconnaissance sociale. C'est fou. C'est fou d'avoir autant d'ambiguïté dans nos comportements sociaux, à nous tous, pour ne pas comprendre que cette responsabilité est une responsabilité majeure et qu'elle doit être reconnue comme une responsabilité majeure. Ce n'est pas le seul métier qui est victime de cette ambiguïté. On a bien en tête que les infirmières, les nurses, avant Covid, étaient considérées finalement dans un niveau social extrêmement bas, peu reconnu. On savait qu'elles travaillaient beaucoup, mais finalement, il a fallu Covid pour s'apercevoir qu'elles avaient un rôle majeur dans nos sociétés. La seule chose, c'est que après Covid, après avoir invité des nurses et des infirmières à la télévision tous les soirs, on a rapidement oublié quel était leur rôle dans l'articulation sociale. La santé n'a pas de prix et la santé a un prix. C'est totalement applicable à l'éducation exactement de la même manière. Aujourd'hui, on va parler de neuroscience et de sustainable education. Je pense qu'il est assez juste de dire que neuroscience, sustainable education, n'aura aucun impact si on n'est pas capable de former, accompagner, recevoir, développer des gens dans le secteur de l'éducation de la petite enfance. Et ça, c'est valable dans le monde entier. Quels que soient les pays, c'est une partie qui n'est pas reconnue à sa juste valeur. On reconnaît aujourd'hui un manque d'intérêt pour la carrière d'éducateurs et de professionnels de la petite enfance. On voit bien, et dans mes visites dans la famille Babilou, on voit bien que c'est un manque. C'est un manque et j'étais extrêmement étonné, venant de l'extérieur, de reconnaître que ce métier est absolument fantastique, de sens, mais également fantastique de complexité et de responsabilité. Je reviens à mon point numéro 1, de dire on confie nos enfants à des gens qui ont finalement une responsabilité énorme de faire attention à eux et également de les développer, de les éduquer, de participer à l'éducation à côté des parents. Cette dimension-là, elle est mal connue. Elle est connue de l'intérieur, elle est connue du secteur, elle est connue de nos métiers, elle est extrêmement mal connue de l'extérieur. On n'a pas le bon niveau, le bon calibrage de reconnaissance de ce qu'est le rôle d'un éducateur, d'un professionnel de la petite enfance. Aujourd'hui, on a du mal à recruter. On a du mal à recruter partout. De Singapour, dans mes visites aux US, de la Hollande à la France et autres pays, on a du mal à recruter. Pourquoi ? Parce qu'on ne donne pas le bon contenu et on ne donne pas la bonne valeur à ce métier, qui est un métier extrêmement important pour nous tous. Si nous sommes d'accord que dans l'éducation, il y a de la valeur, si nous sommes d'accord que la valeur future de nos sociétés, la qualité de vie de nos descendants sera liée à la qualité de l'éducation qu'ils ont reçue, il faut d'un côté développer le sujet du jour, tous les éléments de neuroscience, tous les éléments de sustainable education, mais il faut également, et c'est notre responsabilité à tous les leaders, développer l'attractivité du secteur des professionnels de la petite enfance. Développement de l'attractivité, c'est une question de reconnaissance, c'est une question de reconnaissance sociale, c'est également une reconnaissance de contenu. Il faut que vous tous, il y a 650 dans cette salle professionnelle de la petite enfance, il faut que vous tous, quand vous rentriez chez vous, après une longue journée de travail, vos amis, votre environnement, votre famille vous reconnaissent comme ayant un impact social majeur. C'est facile de le dire ici au pupitre, c'est très difficile à mettre en œuvre, mais il le faut. Et c'est une condition essentielle de succès futur. Nous sommes d'accord, et ce sera ma conclusion, que les 1000 premiers jours sont des éléments essentiels. Les 1000 premiers jours, c'est notre focus, notre point d'attention quotidien. Mais on doit être d'accord également que ces 1000 premiers jours n'auront un impact que si nous sommes solidaires des gens qui, au quotidien, sont les acteurs de ces 1000 premiers jours, et si nous sommes en mesure de faire la connexion entre ces acteurs et les parents. Je vois une opportunité à cette création de contenu autour de Sustainable Education. Je vois une opportunité majeure de remettre les pendules à l'heure et d'aligner les parents, les professionnels de petite enfance et l'ensemble des gouvernants sur ce qui est important pour nous. C'est notre futur, c'est notre responsabilité. Merci beaucoup.
Merci Christophe Font et merci à la Babylou Family Foundation pour l'engagement à améliorer l'éducation de la petite enfance. Et maintenant, Stefania Giannini l'a mentionné tout à l'heure, donc l'investissement que l'Ouzbékistan alloue pour l'avancement de l'éducation de la petite enfance s'inscrit parfaitement dans les thèmes de notre événement inspiré par la déclaration de Tachkent et les engagements pris lors de la conférence mondiale sur l'éducation et les soins de la petite enfance tenue en Ouzbékistan. Je vous propose de regarder quelques images. I think this really sets the stage. And now, ladies and gentlemen, j'ai l'honneur d'inviter son Excellence, le premier vice-ministre de l'Éducation préscolaire et scolaire de la République d'Ouzbékistan, Monsieur Sharifodayev Ousmane Ulfatovich. Merci de me rejoindre sur scène.
Distinguished guests, honorable ministers, respected colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome everyone. It's a great honor and privilege for me to stand before you today at this remarkable event, the International Congress on Brain Science and Early Childhood Care and Education. And I would like to begin my words by expressing my gratitude to UNESCO and the Babylou Family Foundation for organizing this kind of significant gathering, which brings together leading experts, policymakers, educators, and practitioners from across the globe in this sphere. Today we gather not only to discuss advancement in brain science, but also to reaffirm our collective commitment to shaping the future of our youngster generation. Early childhood is the most critical stage in human development. It is during these early years that children's brain develop rapidly, laying the foundation for their lifelong learning, well-being, and overall success. In Uzbekistan, we recognize this crucial phase and have made substantial strides toward transforming our early childhood education system. The adoption of the Tashkent Declaration at the World Conference on Early Childhood Care and Education in November 2022 was a milestone for us, and we are proud that it continues to serve as a beacon of the progress in this field. The Tashkent Declaration highlighted the importance of providing equitable and inclusive early childhood education for all children. We are committed to ensuring that every child in Uzbekistan, regardless of their background, has access to quality early education. As an example, I would like to just mention two numbers. If in 2017, the coverage of the preschool education in Uzbekistan was around 27%. Today, we reach the number more than 75. And thank you. And of course, the government and our president set the level that we need to achieve the 100%. And just a couple of days ago, our president signed a new decree on the further development of early childhood care, and at the same time with the infrastructure issues, increasing the coverage, now we're going to focus on the quality education issues as well. But we know that achieving these ambition goals requires innovation, collaboration, continued learning from the scientific community. In this regard, the role of the brain sciences is indispensable. Scientific research has shown that investing in early childhood education yields the highest return on investment, as highlighted by Nobel laureate Dr. James Heckman. By integrating the latest insights from the neuroscience into the education practices, we can ensure that our children receive the best possible start in their life. However, we cannot do this alone. Today, I want to take the opportunity to encourage all state members to remain committed to the guiding principles and strategies outlined in the Tashkent Declaration. These principles call for universal access to early childhood care, inclusivity, quality teaching, and adequate resources for every child. It is essential that we work together as a global community to uphold these commitments and transform them into the concrete actions. Let this Congress be a call to action for all countries to review their progress, strengthen their policies, and take bold steps to ensure the goals of the Tashkent Declaration. We must ensure that the promises we made to the world's children are fulfilled not only in words, but in meaningful and impactful deeds. One of the key messages from the Tashkent Declaration is that governments must work closely with educators, researchers, families, everyone who involved in this process. This Congress offers a unique opportunity to engage in meaningful dialogue, share best practice, and learn from one another's experience. As we look ahead, I urge all participants to embrace innovation, collaboration, and a renewed sense of the responsibility for the future of early child education. I look forward to fruitful discussion and valuable insights that will emerge from this Congress. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Thank you. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it's my pleasure now to introduce a message from Sunny Varkey. Sunny is UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for Education Partnerships. As a prominent figure in education and philanthropy, he has made significant contributions to the field. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it here today due to professional commitments, but he wanted to share with you this message. Let's take a moment to listen to him.
I'm honored to address the International Congress on Brain Sciences, Early Childhood Care and Education. First, I want to thank UNESCO Director General Ms. Audrey Azoulay, Assistant Director General for Education Ms. Stefania Giannini, and Mr. Christophe Font, CEO of Babalu Family Foundation. Thank you for organizing this important event. Every single one of the 140 million lives born on Earth each year starts in the same way, a baby's piercing cry. At the moment of birth, each of these children are completely innocent. They have not learned suspicion. They have not learned hatred. They have not learned violence. Their experience is only wonder. Children often embrace strangers, whoever they are and wherever they are from. The dividing lines of nations, cultures, and religions have not yet to be imprinted on their minds. You know, this thought always makes me happy. And yet, we let so many of these children down. A staggering 37% of the world's children, over 300 million, won't reach minimum reading standards by 2030. And we need 6 million more teachers by 2030 to help us meet these goals. This is a scar on the world's conscience. It is time that we give teachers the respect they are owed. It is time to realize that investing in early childhood education is investing in all our futures. As a UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador, I know this Congress can inspire change. There will be many important debates and questions raised. But please bear this. Whatever the question, education is the answer. Thank you, and God bless you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Sonivaki, for these kind words. And now our next speaker, mesdames et messieurs, j'ai le plaisir d'inviter sur scène Monsieur Xavier Ouvrat, le vice-président du conseil de surveillance de Babalu Family et de la Babalu Family Foundation.
Madame Stefania Giannini, chère Stefania, chers participants, chers professionnels de la petite enfance, mesdames et messieurs, entre 0 et 6 ans, nous construisons, comme l'a dit Stefania, entre 85 et 90% de notre connexion cérébrale. 85 à 90%, c'est considérable. Cela veut dire que nous sommes tous responsables de donner à chaque être humain l'espace d'épanouissement qu'il mérite pour que cette formidable période permette à chacun de démarrer sa vie avec le maximum de chance et d'équité. À titre d'exemple, savez-vous qu'un enfant épanoui de 3 ans et qui n'a pas connu d'accident de vie comprend en moyenne 1000 mots? Alors que s'il a vécu un accident de vie, qu'il vient d'un milieu social très défavorisé, il y a de fortes chances qu'il ne maîtrise que 200 ou 300 mots. Oui, 1000 mots, maîtrisés pendant les 1000 premiers jours de la vie. 1000 mots qui, si cela se passe bien, deviendront, à l'âge de 5 ans seulement, 10 000 mots. Quel prodige! Imaginez-vous ce prodige incroyable. Mais pour que ce prodige devienne réalité, tout un village doit être à l'œuvre. Et nous avons tous intérêt à savoir et à comprendre ce qui se joue pendant les 5 et 6 premières années de la vie. C'est un enjeu de santé publique et d'éducation, mais j'insiste, c'est un enjeu de santé publique. C'est un enjeu de connaissance. Tout futur parent devrait être formé sur la construction du cerveau de son enfant, sur le sujet qui doit être notre premier combat. Et pour cela, nous devons d'abord nous battre pour qu'un droit opposable à la connaissance du développement de l'enfant soit créé. La première étape de la bientraitance consiste à informer les parents sur ce qu'il se passe au cœur de ce petit être qu'ils aiment très souvent, mais dont ils ignorent presque tout. C'est la première vocation de ce congrès. Depuis 8 ans, lorsque nous avons créé la Babalu Family Foundation avec Édouard et Rodolphe Karl, que je salue, nous avions un sujet en tête, que notre métier, celui de la petite enfance, soit reconnu comme un métier d'éducation. Et je dirais même comme la clé de voûte de tout le système éducatif. Depuis 8 ans maintenant, nous rêvons de partager ce moment avec vous, et nous avions, dès la naissance de notre fondation, formulé ce rêve d'organiser un grand congrès rassemblant neurosciences et petite enfance. Rassemblant neurosciences et petite enfance pour que cette majeure approche scientifique soit reconnue comme le fondement de tout ce processus éducatif, avec l'idée de créer un espace puissant au sein du débat public, comme l'a très bien dit Christophe, pour que chacun comprenne qu'il s'agit d'un enjeu sérieux qui doit devenir la première préoccupation de tous nos systèmes éducatifs. Nous y sommes aujourd'hui. En 2021, j'ai rencontré Stefania Giannini et sa formidable équipe de l'UNESCO, Boren Chakroun, Rokhaya Diawara et toute l'équipe. Nous avons proposé à Stefania d'organiser en 2022 un premier événement autour des neurosciences et de la petite enfance dans un lieu symbolique de notre pays qui me tient particulièrement à cœur, les quartiers nord de Marseille. Ce fut un premier élan. Dans la foulée, Stefania et son équipe nous invitaient à Tachkent, où nous avons vécu, vous l'avez vu sur ces images, un très grand moment, où nous avons vu naître, sous l'impulsion de l'UNESCO, la première coalition mondiale pour l'éducation et la petite enfance. Fort de ce chemin commun, en 2023, nous décidions de nous engager pour 4 ans, ensemble, et de créer ce grand congrès auquel vous participez aujourd'hui. Pour qu'un enfant soit épanoui, il faudra idéalement qu'il ait pu construire 3 grands piliers. En premier lieu, se construire avec des figures d'attachement qui lui donnent une véritable sérénité. Ses parents, quand tout se passe bien, et souvent, à leur côté ou en substitution, un professionnel de la petite enfance. C'est le premier pilier. Le second pilier, c'est d'avoir la chance d'avoir le plaisir d'apprendre, au sens d'apprendre de toutes choses, apprendre la magie d'un son, la simplicité d'un silence, le début d'un raisonnement ou la joie d'un sommeil arrivé au bon moment, le plaisir d'apprendre. Et la troisième chose, le pilier de la Sustainable Education, c'est la confiance en soi. En Europe, on est moins doué que dans beaucoup de continents sur ce sujet de la confiance en soi, et je suis ravi que nous soyons à l'UNESCO pour accepter aussi de nous enrichir de tout ce que les cultures du monde entier peuvent nous apporter sur ce sujet. Cette alchimie rare que constitue l'idée de se faire confiance pour avancer sans écraser, c'est tout un programme et c'est une clé majeure. Cela semble simple et naturel, mais c'est aussi très subtil et complexe. Aujourd'hui, pour essayer de progresser tous ensemble sur ce chemin de l'épanouissement de l'enfant, nous essayerons, à travers ce congrès, de comprendre le fonctionnement du cerveau du jeune enfant, de percevoir comment il apprend, comment il pense, comment il interagit. Et nous essayerons aussi, au mieux, de saisir comment lutter contre les inégalités. Stefania vous l'a dit, c'est quelque chose de fondamental. On a eu l'exemple de l'Ouzbékistan d'arriver à promouvoir l'early education partout dans le monde. Ce qui empêchera très souvent à un enfant d'avoir toutes ses chances, c'est de ne pas avoir eu ce parcours. Donc ce second point qui est la lutte contre les inégalités sera au cœur de ce congrès. Si nous avons choisi de travailler la main dans la main avec l'UNESCO, c'est pour que nous puissions aider la société à comprendre ce qui est le plus important pour elle. C'est pourquoi ce congrès n'est qu'un point de départ d'un partenariat pour lequel nous nous sommes engagés pendant 4 ans avec nos amis de l'UNESCO. La Fondation Babylou Family prendra sa part et avec l'UNESCO, nous initions aujourd'hui un partage de savoir et surtout un partage de pratiques que nous mettrons collectivement à disposition de tous les professionnels de la petite enfance, en français, en anglais, en mandarin, en espagnol, en arabe, en allemand, en néerlandais, via une plateforme digitale ouverte dans laquelle nous recueillerons en open source tous les savoirs, tous les processus de la Babylou Family Foundation, de tous nos partenaires et de tous les professionnels de la petite enfance qui ont structuré l'approche de l'éducation. À travers un objectif de formation des professionnels dans le monde entier, pour lequel nos savoir-faire seront mis en commun, et à travers surtout ce qui sera un second milestone dans les années qui viennent, un travail de fond sur la parentalité, car apprendre d'être parent n'est pas quelque chose d'inné. Ensemble, nous initions aujourd'hui un nouveau chapitre de la Coalition mondiale pour l'éducation. Permettez-moi, en conclusion, de remercier toutes les professionnels de la petite enfance. J'emploie le féminin à dessein, car ce sont très souvent des femmes, toutes les professionnels de la petite enfance qui, chaque jour, en crèche ou à domicile, œuvrent avec tant d'humilité au plus important de nos défis. Je vous remercie.
Merci. Merci, Monsieur Xavier Ouvrat. Merci beaucoup. Et maintenant, j'ai le plaisir d'inviter une autre personnalité qui est très engagée dans le domaine de l'apprentissage et de l'éducation. Il est le directeur de la division des politiques et systèmes d'apprentissage tout au long de la vie à l'UNESCO. Merci d'accueillir Boran Chakroun.
Attends, j'ai remarqué que quand c'est les représentants de Babylou, les applaudissements sont très soutenus.
Oui.
Et comme Xavier parlait de Marseille, je pensais aussi à Paris, Saint-Denis, donc, merci à tout le monde. À DJ Giannini, très cher Stéphania, Monsieur Christophon, représentant et CEO de Babylou, Monsieur Sharif Radjeev Osman Olfatovic, vice-ministre au ministère de l'Éducation de l'Ouzbékistan, cher Xavier, Dr Hackman, chers enseignants, éducateurs de la petite enfance en France et ailleurs, Excellences, chers collègues, Madame Stefania Giannini a déjà parlé de notre portage politique et institutionnel de la question de la petite enfance. Je vais me focaliser sur les questions de partenariat et puis certaines thématiques qui me semblent importantes à prendre en considération. Our call for strong and open partnership is at the heart of UNESCO's Early Child Education and Care Global Partnership Strategy launched already in 2021, which aims to foster collaboration and ensure we deliver as one. It is also at the center of the Tashkent Declaration, an East Action Plan, which is very important to recall. So our collective commitment is to leave no child behind. But as we discussed during this Congress, non-state actors, particularly private sector actors, play a growing role in early child education and care. The Global Education Monitoring Report 2021-2022 reveals that globally 40% of early child education and care services are provided by non-state actors, with even higher proportion for children aged 0 to 3 years, especially in countries where public provision is insufficient. Private and community-based centers often dominate the space, filling critical gaps, but also collaborating for implementing national policies. This underscores why partnerships with organizations like the Babylou Foundation are essential to achieving our shared goals. Together with Babylou Foundation, a key member of the UNESCO's Global Coalition for Education, as Xavier just mentioned, we are collaborating through research and dialogue actions, including the Neuroscience Congress series that started in Marseille already 2 years ago. But the theme of 2024 Brain Science remains as that the first 3 years of life are crucial for cognitive, social, and emotional development of individuals more broadly. Let me briefly mention 3 critical aspects that I think were covered, but I would like to recall them. One is what Christophe was mentioning about the professionalization and attention to educators. The second is about lifelong learning, and as the Director for Lifelong Learning, I can only recall the importance of early child education for lifelong learning. And third, I would like to refer to the intersectorial nature of ACCE services. Professionalization of educators and why it matters. If early childhood educators and caregivers are not adequately trained, the potential negative impact on children's growth can be really profound. Professionalization helps us avoid these risks by ensuring every child receives care and education grounded in the latest scientific research. Professionalization is also about valorizing early child education and care educators' profession. Today, according to our global report that we published a few months ago, we are missing 6 million ECCE educators worldwide to achieve universal pre-primary education. In 1 week, we will be celebrating the World Teacher Day, and we will be examining how to valorize the teaching profession through social dialogue and career professional development. I also mentioned lifelong learning, and I think it's very important to recall that as we progress in our discussion today, we also look at how investing in early child education is the foundation upon which all future learning is built. If we get this right, we set the stage for stronger educational outcome throughout life. Lifelong learning truly begins in the earliest year. But lifelong learning is also to consider that the learning happens not only in kindergarten, in schools, it happens also in other settings, family, community, and other spaces where children learn and play. And it's very important to consider these different spaces and connect them. The third dimension is about intersectoral nature of early child education and care. It's an important aspect to consider that, first of all, how we build interdisciplinary understanding of child development. And we have an economic perspective, but we have also cognitive perspective, social sciences perspective, nutrition, health, and others that were mentioned by colleagues earlier. As we all discuss, our partnership with the Babylou Family Foundation is leading the way in breaking down these silos of disciplines, of sectors, and ensuring that children receive holistic care from birth. This is my belief, and this is my shared vision with my friend Xavier in the Babylou Foundation, which forms the foundation of our collaboration. Our partnership is not just about today, it's also about the future, and the work we will be continuing together to ensure every child gets the best start in life. Before I finish, let me thank some key persons and colleagues who helped us prepare this conference. Je tiens à remercier les 3 modérateurs clés, Grégoire Bost, Ghislaine Dehn et Adèle Diamond. Je dois aussi remercier les 9 chercheurs qui ont contribué à la préparation du congrès, les 9 membres de du groupe d'experts qui a aussi piloté les travaux de préparation. Before we dive deeper in our Congress, let's hear from the eminent Professor Heckman, who will share the economic dimension of this issue, because while we uphold a right-based approach, ECC also is about investment here today, but also in the investment in the future. I thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Boran Chakroun. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, before I invite our next speaker on stage, let me probably say a few words about him. And I would like to remind you that at the end of his presentation, you will have a few minutes to ask a few questions. So, mesdames et messieurs, notre prochain speaker est un économiste de renommée mondiale, lauréat du prix Nobel, reconnu pour ses travaux sur l'éducation et le développement de l'enfant. Ses recherches ont mis en lumière l'importance des investissements précoces dans l'éducation, démontrant comment ceux-ci peuvent transformer vraiment la vie des individus et bénéficier à la société dans son ensemble. Son approche innovante et ses idées éclairées continuent d'influencer les politiques éducatives et d'inspirer les praticiens dans le domaine de l'éducation. Nous avons grand plaisir à l'avoir parmi nous aujourd'hui. Et je rappelle que vous allez pouvoir poser quelques questions à la fin de sa présentation. J'invite tout de suite le Dr. James Heckman. I think we can continue to applaud him. Huh?
thank you very much for the for the enthusiastic reception. I hope I can add something to this convention. I'm very much in awe of the people who are here. They are experts in child development and neuroscience, and I've read their work and benefited a lot from it. And I hope I can add something to this. And what I'll try to do today is summarize some of the main evidence from the literature, some of which I produced and has been produced by others as well, and then also consider some areas of at the frontier of knowledge here and understanding how to create better lives. So without really, it's kind of obvious to say this, but this conference really is addressing a major question. It's really how we're forming children, how we're actually producing flourishing lives, and there can't be anything more important in our society. What I want to argue today is that skills-based policies tackle many aspects of poverty, inequality, and social mobility. And I use the word skills in a very broad way, as I'll try to explain. We know when we look at a lot of data on human development that children, even at an early age, starting at the earliest ages, but following through their lifetimes, that gaps in skills, we're talking about cognitive, social, and emotional skills, skills that have to do with physical achievement as well. A lot of these gaps start opening up very early in the life of the child. And the traditional explanation for this, of course, 100 years ago would have been some kind of social Darwinism, some thinking that these are genetic explanations. And there is research on genetics and the powerful role of genetics. We can talk a bit about that maybe in the exchange. But what we've also learned a lot in the last 100 years is the importance of environment, and we've learned that not only through observational studies, but from experiments, some of which I will summarize today. But today I want us to think about capitalizing on the growing knowledge about life cycle skill formation, and I would be very curious about your own notion, whether you'd accept these observations. First of all, we should recognize that when we measure skill, we have to be much broader than something as narrow as a PISA score or some notion of cognition, which has actually dominated the discussions in education and even early childhood education. We need to recognize the multiplicity of aspects of health. Cognitive skills have come in many varieties, as well as personality, motivation, and what psychologists would sometimes call executive functioning. We want to recognize, as has already been stated and will be stated repeatedly, the importance of the early years in creating these skills. The crucial policy question in addressing how we go about enhancing the society, improving the people living in the society, is how should we address these questions? And it's a really broad question that we need to think about. Many people sort of look at problems and address the problem one at a time. In American colloquial speak, should the squeaky wheel get the grease? And that's been the way that policy has been conducted in many areas in the time over the last hundreds of years. For example, if we think about reducing crime, we think we should increase police. If we think about improving health, we think about building hospitals and training doctors. And I'm not saying those policies might not also be effective, but what I do want to argue is that building the skill base provides multiple benefits across all these domains about human development and human achievement, and we should really think about this. So the real question from a practical economic standpoint is early prevention efficient? You know, how can we target and avoid problems and essentially create opportunities downstream? And I want to talk about some of the evidence on the effectiveness of early targeting to promote skills. By early targeting, I mean younger children, some of the youngest. And there's a very nice study which I think should be brought out more often into the public domain, work by Caspi and Moffat that appeared in Nature Neuroscience a few years ago. Namely, they were able to look at some data, or Nature Human Behavior, sorry. They were actually able to look at segments of the population. This was a population they've been studying in New Zealand for many years, and looking at how focused the populations were and what the origin of social problems, certain types of social problems appeared. And they referred to something called the Pareto principle, named after the famous sociologist, economist Vilfredo Pareto. Namely, the 20% of the actors account for about 80% of the results. And specifically, they were able to say that if we target early on, and we look at things like brain health, we look at neurologists' examination of soft signs, various kinds of signals that we can extract early in the life of the child, these turned out to be very important predictors of later life success and failure. And so looking at this 80% figure, you can see that 20% of the population here is accounting for a large population, large growth in many aspects of human behavior that we consider difficult, in particular crime. And so there is targeting, and there are skills, and we do know enough to start thinking that really is important, not to wait until the problem occurs, but to try to avoid it from the get-go. And if you look at the opposite side about children manifesting stronger developmental trajectories, initial inputs, we can see that those children essentially are doing extremely well, and in fact, in terms of their burden on society, much less. But I need to emphasize, and want to emphasize repeatedly, that skills are much more than schooling. And a lot of international organizations, not UNESCO now, I'm for sure of that, but for many other organizations, we still think about schools, brick and mortar schools, as being the principal places where, in fact, learning occurs. But we need to think not only about the fact that learning occurs more broadly in the workplace, it occurs at home, it occurs in neighborhoods and interaction patterns, but also that when we measure learning, we need to think much more than just about IQ and other things. We know, we have a large body of evidence that what used to be called soft skills have high predictive power in shaping the lives of children and essentially giving people opportunity to flourish and choose and develop in their own unique ways. This is very important. So we have major understanding. Economists and psychologists and others looking in this area have had major advances in understanding which human capacities matter for success in life. And we know that things like executive functioning in particular, motivation, self-regulation, self-esteem, even though these are frequently neglected and not considered hard and very difficult to monitor in terms of what politicians want in terms of strict accountability standards, we can measure these. We are developing strong measures of these skills, but these matter, and we have a lot of tangible evidence showing how predictive these are for success in many aspects of life. And so we see that these skills are very predictive in reducing crime, earnings, health. So a strong body of social and emotional skills can actually create a society that is itself flourishing, not just with flourishing individuals. So what we need to understand, though, and I think this also becomes very important, even in terms of some of the earlier material said in the introductory remarks, we need to really emphasize the importance of the family. There's been too much of a division between the family and the school. The view is somehow there's an institution, we have preschools, we have families. The integration of the family with the school, the integration of the family into social policy is a crucial and missing ingredient in many areas around the world. So we also need to understand that family influence is much more than just money. When we think about child poverty, people frequently just look at the dollars the family earns. Child poverty is a much deeper and richer concept. It has to do with the environments that children grow up in. And that's been studied as well, that very affluent families can be very poor in terms of providing the frameworks and environments in which children can thrive. We know, we already heard this, I'll just remind you, I know there's a sense of deja vu here, but I can't help but repeat it, because we've seen this figure, and we've seen other figures, more recent versions of it, that family environments matter in a purely correlational sense. We can see that more educated women who are mothers and provide more richer homes in general will provide children who speak more, who learn more. We already heard about the great advantage that children have who come from those enriched environments. But we can supplement those environments in ways that all children can benefit from those enriched environments. So let me just briefly review what I consider to be the science underlying the benefits of early investment. I may be challenged by this by the distinguished group here today, but I'll be happy to hear the challenge. There are two ideas about skill formation, two ideas of what we call complementarity in economics. There's a notion of static complementarity, and this is an older idea, and that is that there are high returns for capable people. And this could, in fact, justify a kind of social Darwinism. Namely, we can say, well, who benefits the most from college? If you look at the rate of return to college education, you can see that it's generally highest for the more able people and for the people with stronger motivation and engagement in the society. But the question, does this mean that we should invest only in smart people when they're 20 years old? The answer is no. And the reason is the concept of dynamic complementarity. And this is a new concept. It's an old concept, I think, intuitively, and it's around a lot in the child development literature. But it's an idea that if we invest today in the base of the capabilities of disadvantaged children, that it pays off. Because as we expand the base, we make it possible for them to learn more and to engage more and get much more out of all downstream investment. So the early investment, and we're going to hear a lot today about how important the early years are in forming synaptic connections in terms of really forming healthy and functioning brains. What we can actually see, though, is by creating those circuits, by getting an initial base, it makes later investments successively more productive. And so there's no trade-off between equity and efficiency in this environment. As we invest more in children in the early years, we can essentially produce economic efficiency all the way down the line. And in fact, we've documented this, and I'll show you a little bit of the evidence. And so there's a dynamism, and it's not just the notion of looking at one aspect of skill, it's the notion that we have a variety of skills, skills that promote social emotional skills, create motivation for learning, and provide knowledge about health. Health itself is a major ingredient which makes children able to learn, ability to learn, and so forth. And cognitive skills essentially inform children about what is best practice and can aware of what the new developments are which they can take advantage of. And I think the notion then is to build skills to benefit from later life static complementarity. And this is a curve that I've associated with, I've been drawing for some years, but it's a theoretical exercise. It's a thought experiment. You have to keep this in mind. And so if we think of the life of a child, and we ask ourselves, where in the life of the child are investments most productive? Where is the payoff the best? And we ask ourselves kind of a very strained question. This is not an empirical curve based on some data. It is based on data, but it's not a direct empirical relationship from actual practice. But what it shows is if we invest early on, we create the skill base that makes later investments so productive. So this curve does not say that schooling is not productive. It's highly productive. But as I said earlier, when you build a skill base, when children are more motivated, the cognition level is raised, their ability to learn is enhanced, that the return from schooling later down the line is great. And so as we go through the line, the dynamic complementarity captures the idea that the gain that we have is not just the immediate gain that translates into some lifetime benefit, but also the gain that comes from the enhancement in learning all the way down the line as we enhance ourselves and produce more effective lives. So there's powerful evidence for the effectiveness of early interventions, and I want to just summarize some of that evidence and conclude. One thing I do want to make a remark about, and it's really in response to a recent article in Science magazine, but which is, I think, quite negative in its impact. I want to talk about the long-run evidence on the effects of early childhood development. I think there really is a danger in some of the practice in early childhood, and I think we need to be very, very careful. Long-run evaluations are extremely important. There are a lot of very successful interventions that fade out, that don't have any lasting quality. And we also need, when we measure interventions, not just to look at test scores of a cognitive type, but also social and emotional skills. These long-term evaluations play a very important role. But the literature is sometimes filled with large and even miraculous short-term interventions. And I think it also has another feature, which I think is dangerous. Namely, that instead of looking at a particular mechanisms and understanding the principles underlying how skills and how flourishing is developed, we sometimes focus on curricula. And there's a whole literature where people sort of look at a bunch of programs, put them together, rank them somehow, and say, my purpose is to try to understand the very best that exists out there. The best doesn't yet exist. We have a lot more to learn. What we should be looking for, and we are starting to look for, I think, more systematically, are the principles underlying what a good program is. What are the ingredients? And I'll try to summarize my understanding of what those are. But I'll say the one thing you don't want to do is something like this, which is you see a lot of these meta-analyses where people look at short-term evaluations of programs and argue one thing or another about the evaluation of one program or another. And that's a dangerous practice because it leads to some very short-term conclusions without any validity. And secondly, and this is the point I really want to talk about, there was recently an article published in Science magazine talking about the unsettled science on long-run effects of early education. And I think this is actually a very bad article, and I think it's a dangerous article. And the reason why I say that, not just to appeal to people here who work on early childhood, but I think the paper itself is inaccurate, not only in describing Head Start. There was a study done in the United States a few years ago about the Head Start experiment, the National Head Start experiment. There are some people in love with experiments to the exclusion of any other form of evidence. I'm not one of them, but experiments are useful. But the Head Start experiment was flawed. It was deeply flawed because the children who were in the treatment group in that experiment were, yes, in Head Start. But the people in the control group of the experiment were also in Head Start, or at least many of them, or in better programs. Head Start is a local program, and so when you are randomized out of Head Start, you could find another Head Start program for many people. And so the experiment itself was flawed. And when this flaw was corrected with econometric methods, we found strong evidence of Head Start. And the same thing about many of the other programs that I suspect. I won't go through all the Head Start evidence, but there's a long body of evidence. The Perry study survived rigorous application of small sample, robust studies. And so I do worry a lot about piling together a bunch of undigested, incomparable studies with different measures, different age groups, different populations, and making generalizations. This is a danger, I think, in this field as it stands right now. So I want to consider some of the evidence that I consider serious. And then I want to talk about the Perry Preschool Project and other projects as well. This is a project from which I think some valuable lessons can be drawn. The program started at age 3, 2 hours a day, a very low-intensity program, and the curriculum was plan, do, and review. I recently published a paper, or wrote a paper, it was circulated in the National Bureau, about 50 years of data from Perry. The beautiful thing about Perry is that we actually have a randomized trial at an early age, very intensive, done by a very wise founder, David Weichert, who has many different ideas which I think are relevant today in terms of the design of social programs and early childhood programs. And the interesting thing about this is that we can study these children, and we follow these children from the early days when they were enrolled at 3 and 4 until the age 50. And it's interesting to see what a lifetime trajectory looks like in this case. What we found in this case, looking only at a limited set of outcomes, because we didn't really have good health data and other factors, is that there was a high rate, 10% rate of return. What that means is for each dollar or euro invested in this program, you get 10% per annum. And this 10% per annum includes the cost of collecting taxes. It includes all the distortions that come with raising money to finance this program. So this really is a very inclusive, hard-nosed economic analysis. But we can see that there were long-run effects of this program on things like IQ and executive functioning, but also on social and emotional status. So without getting into too much detail, what we can actually see is what psychologists would call externalizing behavior. In this way, the way the figure is written, the way the term is measured here, the farther to the right, the more mass in the distribution, the better the externalizing behavior. In other words, in this case, bigger is better. You can see that there was substantial benefit in terms of social and emotional skills, and in terms of academic motivation as well. But the interesting thing about Perry wasn't just that we had strong effects, and there were effects on many areas: crime, on things having to do with earnings and schooling and so forth and so on. What was also true was that the effects lasted across the generation. And so, for example, if we look at the effects of the children, and remember, these people now are in their 50s. We follow them now until their children are now in their 20s to early 30s. And so what we actually can do is follow how well their children do. And if you can read this, it's pretty small, so I can barely read it myself. But nonetheless, you can see that the children are doing extremely well. And what this means then is there are strong intergenerational effects. And these effects are coming on things having to do with high school graduation, parenting, and so forth. I can't go through all the details. But another aspect of this, which has frequently been ignored, we looked at one child, one family, is that when you look at the siblings and look at the spillover across siblings, we see substantial benefits. And so we can see that the siblings, the younger siblings of the children in this study are showing much greater outcome as well. So there's spillover effects, which we ignore typically in evaluating and thinking about these programs. We are really providing an intervention into family life. And I'll come back to that and close my talk with that theme. So this changes the nature of the cost-benefit calculations. You get benefit-cost ratios allowing for sibling spillovers, multi-generation effects that are substantial. And one thing that's very interesting, and we talk a lot about heritability and the importance of the transmission of family influence across generations. It's a very important topic, always a topic. But if you look, for example, at this relationship here, just in two dimensions, education and crime, males and females, and there is a gender difference in the outcome of these programs, and that has partly to do with different developmental aspects of female and male children. But if you look, for example, just at the male education, and look at that dark column, you can see that the correlation between the education of the father and or education of the parent and parents and the education of the child is about 0.8. That's in the control group. If you look at the treatment group, which is this dark little bar that's close to zero, it is zero essentially, there's actually no relationship whatsoever. So you'll break that intergenerational link. And the same is true for crime. And I think if you go for females, you get a similar kind of qualitative relationship, but quantitatively somewhat different. So there's strong intergenerational effects, which you need to take into account. Not only you're building this generation, but you're building the next generation. Another program that was done in this way, ABC Darien, done in North Carolina some 45 years ago. We've collected data on them through age 45 now. That we can see it's a very comprehensive approach, much more comprehensive than Perry. And what it does is has improves many of these same activities that we talked about. And one thing that we did measure from ABC that we couldn't have data on from the Perry study was the health effects of this program. And so we published this paper in Science 10 years ago now, and you can see very strong effects in terms of health. Now, this was a program that was designed to improve cognitive skills. So he said, wait a minute, you're boosting IQ. How come you're suddenly, why do we have these very nice effects on blood pressure, on metabolic syndrome, and so forth? And the reason is what we were doing in these programs, and what these programs do is not just target one item. That's a huge mistake. We're not dealing with a curriculum for blood pressure or for cholesterol or any one of these items. What you're doing is you're enhancing the skill base. You're building both the cognitive and social and emotional basis. And therefore, you're building agency in these individuals so they can take control of their lives and influence their lives. We know that self-treatment is very important in health. These children are now at 35. So this is the rate that was quoted earlier. For males, it's about 14% per annum. Again, all the adjustments for distortions of taxation and so forth. For females, about 10% per annum. And the interesting thing is, where do the benefits come from? Well, in this ABC program, we can see there are huge benefits, big costs, by the way, huge costs, which is a barrier. A lot of government agencies will say these are just way too much to spend on a given child. So you can see that the costs are enormous, but the benefits are enormous as well. So the rate of return is very high. And in fact, one thing that's very interesting is that the parental labor income and the time saved, this is not only an early childhood program, it's a program that also provides daycare and lets women then go to work or allows them to go back to school. And there are real enhancements in parental earnings. So these are all very interesting things. The program income of the mother from the provision of childcare pays for itself, which is kind of an interesting notion. But I don't want to stop with just a list of programs, because that's kind of where the literature is these days. Having lists. Some people say, oh, we go to this clearinghouse here and we look at which one has the highest rate of return and we adopt it. That's really not what I think is useful. What we want to do is think about the mechanisms underlying the effective early childhood interventions. And so what happened to the second generation family? It turned out that if you looked at the parents this is back to the Perry data. If you look at the parents and you look at the crucial years when the children are growing up, the treatment group parents had much higher earnings, mother and father, than the control group children. They had much richer family environments in the sense of resource rich. We can also see that the families were more stable, and therefore there were two-parent families that were true for among, or at least stable cohabitations, present for the participants rather than for the controls. And that also contributed to the well-being of the children. But now I want to talk about and conclude with this and present some evidence about the crucial role of parenting and mentoring. Because sometimes we think about schools, we think about teachers, and maybe we can justifiably be concerned about teacher salaries and all that. I don't want to deny any of that importance. But what I'm trying to get at here in the concluding summary, concluding commentary, I should say, is actually the crucial role of parenting and mentoring. And this is something that we sometimes ignore. I know that many of the professionals here will completely agree, and I'm just repeating what's well known. But I don't think it's well enough known. And so what happened to these programs like Perry? What did Perry really do? It enriched the home lives of children outside of child care center. It kept the parental engagement active long after the children were in pre-K. So we're saying we should worry about the teachers, we need a bigger teacher workforce. Yes, but there's no greater teacher than the parent. There's no greater influence than the family at home. So if we recognize that we bring into this strategy not just teachers, but also parents, and how parents who are staying with the child, mentoring the child, play a very valuable role in shaping the life of the child long after the child has left preschool. So we have different measures. The Perry people are very wise. I don't want to go over it. It's not overwhelming, but it is consistent with a lot of evidence on more parental warmth, less authoritarianism, and so forth and so on. And so one thing that we know, there are a lot of programs like this that we call omnibus programs. Perry did a lot of things. ABC did even more. But the question is, what was the secret sauce? What was the ingredient? What was the crucial ingredient that was operating here? Specifically, I want to look at programs that focus attention on one aspect of child development. This may be very provocative, and I'd be more than happy to hear what others say in response to what I'm about to say. But suppose we only focus on home visiting programs. And it doesn't have to be home visiting, but programs that interact with the parents. It could be at the centers. So it's not necessarily, but let's call it home visiting. That's the name generically given to these programs. And the study that I've been associated with recently, working with the Jamaicans, this is Sally Grantham McGregor's program that was done in Jamaica some 35 years ago, is a home visiting program that was far simpler, far smaller in magnitude than the ABC or Perry program. It was a weekly visit of 1 hour a week, visiting the family, the caretaker usually. The visitors have the same background as the mother, so there's no class difference, there's no education difference. The visitors are trained by people who are highly trained, but nonetheless, the ones who deal with the parents or the caregivers are the ones who actually are of those neighborhoods and of those people. And what did we find? We have an intervention that was, Sally Grantham McGregor and her group in Kingston, Jamaica, had 4 groups, and the group that I'm focusing on most, and the one that had the greatest impact, was cognitive stimulation and intervention. And we found long-lasting effects for the cognitive, social, and emotional components. I say we found because a group of us, some economists, Paul Gertler, Rodrigo Pinto, myself, working with Sally and her team, have actually been doing some panel studies, putting together all of this data over the period up to age 30. So if you look at this program, remember, this is a very much less intensive program. ABC was 8 hours a day for 5 years. Very, and full-time, full-year program. This is 1 hour a week for a limited time of a few years. And what are the outputs of these programs? If you look at age 30 results, you can see the wages are strong. They're certainly much higher wages. If you look, for example, at who goes to college, much stronger effect for the treated people. And we can say, well, look at IQ scores. People say, well, you can't boost IQ. Well, you can, and you can look at this measure. This is the measure of IQ. We have other measures as well. And so you can see a boost in the IQ, and then some psychological symptoms, reduction in depression, some notion of improving executive functioning and the like. And so here is the score on executive functioning. In other words, the children were given agency. Now, this is pretty remarkable, I think. These programs are about 1/20th the cost of these more omnibus programs. But this seems to be very suggestive, very interesting. So we see a boost in IQ and so forth. There's a similar program that's been launched in Ireland. Orla Doyle, her group at University College Dublin, has a home visiting program that meets with the parents at a center now. It's home visiting in some sense. It's engaging the parents. It's probably a more accurate way to describe it. But looking at these kids, going to the parents of these kids, and so the intervention is with the parents, not the children directly. But then the parents themselves transmit the message. They provide richer environments. They're given suggestions about, like in the Jamaican case, to make a scrapbook out from materials you can get at the village dump. Very low cost, very flexible, and very adaptive to a variety of cultures. And what's happened is that this program has very strong treatment effects. We followed these kids until the age now, until the 20s, these are the early teenage years, and these will be followed on into their 20s. So in terms of being on track, whether they're managing attention at school, whether or not they're scoring above entry and verbal ability, and so forth and so on. And so you're getting very strong effects, again, from a very low intensive intervention. And again, coming back to this Perry example I talked about earlier, if you look at the IQ, the gap between the correlation between the IQ of mothers and children in the low treatment group compared to the high treatment, the control group on the top, the treatment group at the bottom, you can see that there is a big drop in the correlation. That in fact we do improve actually the IQs, and we do break the intergenerational link. Therefore, we provide opportunity that you're not a victim of the accident of birth in this case. And finally, let me just conclude with a study that we've taken these ideas from from Jamaica, and now gone out to rural China. So literally, I say we, that includes Sally Grantham McGregor, working with us in this team. And we're looking at the China Development Research Foundation. So this is Gansu, way out in western China. We adapted the Jamaica REACH program to the local context. Again, it's 1 hour a week for 36 weeks, started shortly after birth. And what we saw, very strong effects on social, emotional, fine motor, language, cognitive skills, not so much on gross motor skills. And what we also found, which is kind of interesting, was that this program that suggests something about the universality of child development. So it's true, the context would change, the language was Chinese, not English as it was in Jamaica, but what we can see is very strong relationship, similar relationship anyway, at the same age and at the same, so what we're seeing then is very strong similarities in growth process between the Jamaican children at the same ages with the same measurements and the Chinese children who are comparable. So this gives you an idea of how the growth curves are essentially lining up. So the interesting thing about this study is that we can also examine in a very great detail learning and how the learning is going. So we have weekly data on the learning of children, of both cognitive skills, language skills, fine arts skills, and then gross motor skills. And this is a pattern you're probably very familiar with. As you go across levels of difficulty, and the levels change, each new level, there's some issue, the child passing rate goes down on average, and then gradually there's learning, and it picks itself up. You can also see, though, out of this, ability differences. So we can actually measure how quickly it takes a child to master a task at a given level of difficulty. And those who are learning it quickly are high ability by our measure, and then low ability children are the 20% who are the slowest to learn. And there are sharp differences. So there are ability differences, there's no question about it. And you can think of this as an endogenous, as a way of our measuring IQ. But what you can also see is what the learning rate is going on, and how the early exposures, and they're repeating the same lessons for many, many weeks on this same program. It's not the best designed program from a purely adaptive strategy point of view, but a one that actually gives us very nice scientific clarity, where we can actually give children the same lessons repeatedly over, in this case, 15 weeks, and then see how much the growth occurs. So the high ability children pick up very quickly. The normal children, the moderate ability children, the red dots, they pick up. But there is learning, there's gradual learning. And the longer the exposed, the greater, that's really a version of dynamic complementarity. And we see that throughout. So we can see that the lower ability children across different things, this is language, but we have the same patterns that come out from cognition, mathematical knowledge, and fine arts skills as well. And so there really is a sense, here we can see convergence, that as the children become, these are high ability children at the top, they know more, but what you're getting is convergence, that with repeated exposure, this is literally repeating a lesson that's virtually identical over these weeks, we can see a growth in skill. And so we actually can form this capabilities and so forth. I won't, and then we can actually, this is another version, I'll just skip past this. So what do these programs cost? These programs cost about 5% of what some of the more sophisticated Perry and ABC programs, especially ABC programs. It can be adapted to rural environments. It's not very fancy. There's not a curriculum other than essentially teaching the mother, engaging the mother or the caregiver in being able to work with the child. And so what do we find? This is something that I find extremely interesting. So we do something that's somewhat bizarre. We compare the children, Perry, 3 to 5, the ABC children who are age 5, or half a year to 4.5, roughly, and with what, in terms of things having to do with the home environment, same measures, by the way, so these are identical measures, and Preparing for Life and China Reach is there. Here I'm applying this standard scientific principle of comparability, not just doing some jumbled bunch of comparisons across studies. What we're doing is we can see then that actually, in terms of home environment, the China Reach program is ahead of the Perry and ABC, far more costly programs. If you look, for example, at things to do with cognitive life skills, less favorable, but you can still see a very important gain from Jamaica, China Reach, and Preparing for Life. These very low-cost programs. Again, the secret ingredient, building, mentoring, interaction, and creating this kind of environment where there's a lot of mutuality and interaction between the parent and the child. And therefore, it's working with the home. It's engaging the home environment. And we can do this. We can then do this for different ages. We start running out of data on China because the China study is only up through about age 4. We have data at 5 or so. But in terms of the other programs, we can see that the home visiting programs are comparable in terms of producing some early life skills on cognitive, non-cognitive, and other traits. And then when you start looking at some of these home visiting programs side by side with the more intensive omnibus programs, we then see comparable results in terms of behavior, education, employment, violence, alcohol, and marijuana. So what I would take from this is something very important. And again, this is a matter of always ongoing experiment. I'm not going to say you must adopt Jamaica, you must adopt China Reach or whatever. That's a mistake. I think what you want to do is take principles which have to do with intensive, expanding the nature of the home interaction with the child and engaging in the parent-child interaction. And I think this is the lesson that I've learned from this, and I'll be more than happy to hear alternatives if there are challenges to this. But I would argue that this is an effective way, and it's very cheap. That's important, at least in many contexts where we're trying new early childhood programs. A rich curriculum with a bunch of very rigid rules isn't important compared to the idea of building that positive interaction, doing the mentoring. And whether it's, we call it parenting early on or mentoring in terms of job training and apprenticeship programs later on, it's the same principle, that there's a tremendous amount of learning that comes from interaction, from warmth, from attachment, from the ability of letting the child fail, succeed maybe sometimes, but also fail and be assured the child can start over again and have support going forward. It's that kind of interactive environment which I think leads to tremendous growth in children. And also it brings into the whole process the family. Instead of thinking of the family as an isolated unit outside, education really needs to integrate the family crucially. And I would say not just in early childhood, but in regular schooling and even later years and so forth. So anyway, just to summarize, many countries face challenges. Building skills meets these challenges. Skills are multiple in nature. Family life is a crucial determinant of life outcomes. Parenting is crucial. And mentoring, I would argue, in later stages is a form of parenting. The early childhood interventions that stimulate parenting are effective, not only for the children, but for the siblings and the children of the children. So there's strong intergenerational multipliers. So I would argue the essence, at least of the many programs I've studied, and there are others that I didn't put through here on this list, the interaction with children plays a very important role. Anytime we can measure it, we find that it plays a very important role. Jamaica Reach Up program is a prototype. It's wonderfully dirt cheap, literally dirt cheap, in the sense of relying on the village dump, but nonetheless, it does seem to have long-term payoff. It's built on the general principle that emphasizes the value of attachment, engagement, and scaffolding. And the goal of intervention analysis should not be, and I would stress this repeatedly, even though it's practiced, that it's viewed this way, as the best program among a list of programs. You know, go to the Washington State list and say, here's number 1 or 2. That's nonsense. The crucial thing is to think about the best principles and adapt those principles to local circumstances. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to any questions. Nice and water. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Heckman. Very insightful indeed. So now is the time we take 2 questions. I'm sorry, that's all the time we have. And we have microphones in the room. So maybe we will take a question from this side and the other side. Please stand up, raise your hands so that we can see you. And if you could introduce yourself and ask your questions very concisely to Dr. Heckman.
Bonjour et merci de me donner la parole. Je suis le docteur Guinoun Leïla, je suis pédiatre de terrain. et j'ai travaillé à l'hôpital et en libéral et dans des crèches. Et j'ai pour Monsieur Heckman qui a donné une vision de la prise en charge du tout petit enfant, je voudrais lui poser la question de savoir ce qu'il pense de l'ordonnance culturelle. Je vais vous expliquer en quoi ça consiste. Ça consiste à prescrire la culture comme un besoin pour l'enfant, comme nous l'avons fait par le passé, pour ce qui concerne la nutrition, les maladies infectieuses comme les vaccinations. J'ai eu l'occasion de faire ce travail.
Le docteur Heckman, comme il ne comprend pas le français, si vous me permettez, parce qu'il faut que je puisse lui expliquer.
Merci.
Voilà, donc, the lady is a pediatrician, and her question is about, what about if we, vous me corrigerez si je traduis mal, what about if we have some kind of, let's say, cultural prescription as, as a physician, which will include having, vous pouvez continuer?
J'ai eu l'occasion, je ne comprends pas trop bien l'anglais pour pouvoir suivre. Voilà, je suis désolée.
So that they used to do in the past, like some kind of prescription where you would like formally, as a practitioner, prescribe sports, and vous disiez donc de prescrire une ordonnance culturelle.
Formaliser en fonction de l'âge, la fréquence, l'âge de l'enfant, la fréquence des utilisations de la culture étant la lecture, le langage oral, la musique, pour lutter contre la carence culturelle, parce que tout ce qu'il a dit, c'est de la carence culturelle.
So I will try to make it short. So we're speaking about culture, and what if it could formally prescribe things like, okay, when children are underage, they have to be starting to read, vous disiez donc la lecture,
les jeux, la musique, les spectacles vivants soient prescrits au même titre que ce que nous avons fait par le passé, qui a eu des réponses et des résultats fantastiques par rapport à la nutrition, par rapport à la prévention vaccinale, etc. Et les médecins sont en première ligne, les médecins, les pédiatres. Nous voyons en France tous les nourrissons de France. Depuis la naissance.
Just like prescribing, for medication, if we could prescribe culture. So culture being reading, music, and everything, and help the practitioners like Madame here, who is a pediatrician.
Well, I have no doubt that there's a huge benefit of having doctors and others who are intervening and engaging in the early life of the child, providing the child with culture. I would just say, to my knowledge, the most effective vehicle for transmitting that culture, though, is the parent and the caregiver and the home and their values. This gets to a very delicate area, actually, where, and the reason why home visiting and providing very basic principles is a very useful idea, rather than providing a prescribed curriculum. Because what you want to do is find where the child's at. This is the Vygotsky idea of really scaffolding the child. And so at some crucial point you ask, well, where is this child? Where can this child be? And it can be true that these other devices, these cultural influences, maybe the music, maybe some aspect of drama, some aspect of life, playing and sport and so forth, all these are very important. But I guess who bears the message and who would bear this message on a sustained basis, I think is very important. The pediatrician is there early on in the life of the child. The parent is there generally longer. The parent is really there as an ongoing source, the parent, the caregiver, and the community. So I don't want to limit it to say that, no, these other sources can't be very valuable. I'm just saying that from my intuition, it seems that the steady influence is one of the family and the local environment where the child's growing up. And if that supports the child and gives the child the culture, that'll be very effective.
Fantastic. Thank you, Dr. Heckman. Merci, madame. Je vais prendre une autre question d'une autre personne, s'il vous plaît. Si vous avez dans la salle, madame, si on peut passer le micro devant ou... Merci de vous présenter et je vous demanderai de faire des questions concises. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much, Dr. Heckman. My question is, right now, all these interventions that are done with the family, they target usually disadvantaged children or countries that they need help. Now, UAE is facing a bigger challenge, is that it is a rich economy, but the young parents we're facing are not speaking the Arabic language with their children. And not only this, we're going towards, you were talking about the PISA and the cognitive skills that we're measuring. There is now, what is your opinion on the OECD countries that are now pushing for PISA for young children? Yes.
Well, be careful. I mean, of course, PISA, I mean, each of the, one thing about the early childhood literature and the education literature that's always impressed me. I'm an outsider. Remember, I'm an economist. I have this ability to kind of go home and forget about all this and not have and be involved in all the bickering and fighting within the field. But I can look at it and I study it and I interact closely. And I think the PISA scores have been very successful in promoting. I mean, I work in China a lot, and people are in China very proud that Shanghai has such high PISA scores. I think it's a huge mistake. PISA itself, though, you realize, is now changing. PISA now is starting to measure social and emotional skills. People like Pat Kailona, the Educational Testing Service, and many others have been engaged in trying to get more comprehensive measures. So if you're pushing the early childhood measures of PISA, make sure you get the social and emotional measures. But I'm very skeptical about some of these assessments that take place only through these so-called objective PISA scores. There's a tremendous amount of knowledge that we acquire from one-on-one interactions that aren't at all captured on these PISA scores. So I would go slowly. I understand the institutions it sounds very good to have an objective measure, but I think the early years should not be one of direct instruction and ones where we essentially are teaching people, you know, the alphabet maybe, yes, but not teaching a particular curriculum. You know, David Weikart, who actually founded the Perry Preschool program, did some early experiments in the early stages of the Perry program where he was looking at direct instruction of the kind that would teach people facts and teach children the so-called curriculum. And he found that was far less effective. And when you looked at measurements, even these measurements of the test scores and social and emotional measures that he took in the early days. So I think we have to be really careful that we start ruining the lives of children early years, but with tests and with assessments that are, quote, objective, but don't recognize where the child is advancing. So it's really, I think in the end, when we have a successful educational system that's not yet here, we'll have a personalized education. AI is taking us partly there. I've engaged in some of that work where we're now getting better and better assessments. But if we know where children are at and by where they're at in terms of this whole range of social and emotional skills, as well as cognitive development, fine arts skills, and the like, then I think we can start tailoring instructions in a more individual way. So I'm a little worried about ruining a good thing with an objective test score and an assessment that becomes national politics.
Thank you, Dr. James Heckman. Thank you for your questions. Thank you. It was an honor to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
That's it.
And I hope you're staying with us a little bit so that you can probably have a chat later on with Dr. Heckman. All right, I would like, before I introduce, we have a short video coming up next, but before I introduce that video, I would like to say, look at this room, it's full, and we have like 100 of people outside watching this through retransmission. It's a success, thank you. Well, now we have a short immersive video for you. It's Babelou's Immersive Rooms. It's an innovative experience which is designed to enrich children's learning and foster their development in a stimulating environment. And I would like to seize the opportunity to recognize the efforts of early childhood professionals who work tirelessly to create strong, positive experiences for children. Thank you very much, and let's watch the video.
Les recherches sur les neurosciences nous ont apporté énormément d'éléments de connaissances, mais aussi de confirmation sur les pratiques qui sont proposées en crèche et qui vont avoir un impact sur le développement du cerveau. Ce que vit le petit enfant, via la répétition des expériences du quotidien, va s'inscrire durablement dans son cerveau. Un environnement qui est bienveillant et empathique va lui permettre également d'avoir un impact bénéfique sur son développement. Les salles immersives sont des pièces ou un espace qui est imaginé et créé par des professionnels dans l'intérêt de l'enfant et pour son plaisir. On y retrouve des objets et des matériaux variés avec une ambiance visuelle, sonore et même parfois olfactive dédiée à une thématique. Le tout est à disposition libre des enfants.
On co-construit la salle entre les parents, les professionnels, avec du matériel de chez les parents, des professionnels et du coup de la crèche.
Oui, c'est toi en photo. Tu te reconnais.
En entrant dans ce monde enchanteur, l'enfant observe, prend le temps, découvre, expérimente et explore avec ses pairs et par lui-même.
De se dire que finalement il est intéressé par ça à son âge, je me suis aussi dit que je pouvais faire des activités de découverte avec lui culturelles, chose que je n'aurais pas fait du tout forcément avant à la maison.
L'art c'est dans tout. C'est très important que les enfants apprennent dès le bas âge l'importance de l'art.
Afin que l'enfant développe toutes ses potentialités, il va être nécessaire que l'équipe réfléchisse à ce projet en amont.
À quoi vous pensez? Qu'est-ce qu'on peut mettre en place? Autant au sol que sur les murs, etc.
Il est important de choisir le matériel, d'avoir une proposition qui soit esthétique, mais aussi de travailler en amont la place de l'adulte, que ce soit le parent ou le professionnel, mais aussi la place des émotions de l'enfant. Les possibilités de thématiques sont infinies.
Ça nous aide pour exprimer les émotions. Enfin, Paul, j'ai trouvé que ça l'avait aidé par rapport à ça.
Il est prouvé que le cerveau de l'enfant se développe à partir de la manipulation, des expériences sensorielles, mais aussi de l'interaction qu'il a avec l'autre. C'est pourquoi les salles immersives sont une ressource inouïe pour mobiliser les sens, ouvrir l'esprit et créer du lien. Source de stabilité émotionnelle, d'ouverture d'esprit, de tolérance et vont permettre aux générations futures d'apprendre à collaborer et à coopérer ensemble.